Welcome to the latest edition of the Out of the Mouth of Babes Bible series. As always, we're coming to you with a lesson strictly and straight out of the Bible. For those who don't know me, my name is Brother Brandon, and my normal reader, is my son, Brandon Jr. Well, today we got a lesson titled, The Mark of the Beast. And I repeat, The Mark of the Beast. And this is a lesson that the Lord allowed me to put together. I was talking to a sister a few days ago, and she's new to hearing the Word of God. And I was just, trying to show her some things in the Bible. First and foremost, I was showing her that she was Israel, and I was showing her, just some of the background and some of the practices and some of the traditions that, she herself and most people tend to follow, because that seems to be the common way. Everybody is going along with the holidays and the traditions of the world. And, God strictly forbids us from doing such things. So as speaking to her about those things, I also, opened her eyes to, what we like to call, or what the Bible likes to call, the mark of the beast. And as I got into talking about it, I realized it was quite a bit to explain in a short time limit. So with that being said, I figured that I might as well do a lesson on it, and I would try to keep it as brief as possible, but we're going to try to get some understanding of what the mark of the beast is. The mark of the beast, you can read about the mark of the beast in Revelation, the 13th chapter. We're going to be in that chapter a couple times throughout the course of this lesson today, and it's a very important thing that all servants, or all people I should say, should understand, because your very salvation depends on you understanding what the mark of the beast is and what it represents. And I'm gonna give you a little heads up. It is not necessarily as physical as people like to make it seem. It has a whole lot of spiritual implications with it as well. And that's what we're going to touch on, because the word mark itself is not just synonymous with something physical or something tangible. As you can read in the Bible. You can read in Psalms where it says, mark the perfect man. So when he's telling you to mark the perfect man, he's telling you identify the perfect man. He's not telling you to go over there and write on him like I will write on this board, and we'll be writing on this board throughout the course of this lesson. A mark is simply a means of identifying someone or something, and it's not necessarily always meaning a physical or tangible mark. And the Bible speaks of the mark of the beast, and it teaches us to beware that we don't find ourselves taking that mark, because as we're going to read later, if you take that mark, you pretty much bought yourself a first-class ticket to the lake of fire. So with that being such, it would be of great importance for us to understand exactly what the mark of the beast is and what it represents. So we're going to get right into the lesson. And like I said, you can read about it in Revelation, the 13th chapter. And that's exactly where we're going to start this lesson off today. And like I said, the title of this lesson again is The Mark of the Beast. And we're going to go to Revelation, the 13th chapter. Revelation, the 13th chapter. I'm going to allow my reader to get there. And we're going to read a few scriptures, a few verses here. And you might do well to hold this position, because we will be back here shortly. So we're in Revelation, the 13th chapter. And once my reader gets positioned, I'm going to have him start reading at verse 1. Revelation 13 and verse 1. When you get there, go ahead.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority.
Okay, so now we're talking. The Bible is describing to us about a beast, and it's telling you that at verse 1, he said a beast. He says he stood upon the sand of the sea. He saw a beast rise up out of the sea. Now, what we must understand when the Bible talks about seas and waters and stuff, it's talking about peoples. So he's talking about a beast in particular coming from among the tribes of the earth for the most part. And he gives you some characteristics of it. He gives you 7 heads and 10 horns. He gives you 10 crowns. And he also said upon his head is the name of blasphemy. That's key information to make you understand or help you understand what this beast is representative of. Blasphemy is pretty much words against the Most High, words against the Holy Scripture. So this beast is going to be ultimately caught up in sacrilege or idolatry or any form of blasphemy against God. But then he goes to give you some more physical characteristics, which we're going to pay attention to. He said, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as of a lion. So these are key descriptions that we're going to make note of. We're going to make note of these because they're going to help us understand what this beast truly represents. So he starts off at verse 2 when he says that it was likened to a leopard. So we're going to put a leopard on the board here. I'm try to write with the right part of the marker so it'll be a little more visible. Excuse my handwriting. It's not one of my greater traits. I'm a fixer. And then he goes on to say the feet as a bear. So we're going to put bear on the board. Then he goes on to say the mouth of a lion. So we're going to put lion on the board as well. So these are three animal characteristics that the Lord has given us in regards to the beast. When you get that, what verse is that? Verse 3?
Verse 3.
Go ahead.
And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast.
Okay, so now this beast itself suffered a wound. But I also wanted to help you point out the fact that at verse 2 it ended by saying, and the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and great authority. And what do we know of a dragon? The dragon, for the most part in the Bible, represents Satan. So this beast that the Bible is telling us about is getting its power directly from Satan. And then this beast also, it said it was wounded, but this wound was healed. These are all key characteristics that we need to pay attention to as we go through this lesson. Read verse 3 again, I'm sorry.
And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast.
And all the world wondered after the beast. So this beast is going to pretty much take the world by storm, and the world is going to pretty much be following whatever this beast tells it to do. That's what it means when it says wandered after the beast. But let's go to Daniel, because Daniel the 7th chapter, because Daniel pretty much was given a lot of prophecy from God. And he was also given prophecy about this same beast that we read about in Revelation. And reading what the prophet Daniel wrote would help us better identify who this beast is and what it represents. So we're going to go to Daniel the 7th chapter, and I'm going to have my reader start reading at verse 1. Daniel 7 and verse 1. And like I said, the title of this lesson is The Mark of the Beast. When you get there, my son, go ahead.
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel spake and said, I saw my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea.
Mm-hmm.
And four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another.
Okay, so now Daniel saw four great beasts come out of the sea. And like I said, sea represents people, nations, the people on the earth. And so he's telling you right here, he said, and four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. Go ahead.
The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings.
The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Go ahead.
I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it.
Okay, so this first beast was one, it said was like a lion. That's one of the characteristics that we got in Revelations about the beast. What verse you at?
Verse 5.
Go ahead.
And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear.
A second like to a bear. So there goes the bear again. This is letting us know that we're talking about the same thing here. Go ahead. Start that verse over again. I'm sorry.
And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised itself up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh.
Mm-hmm.
After this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard.
There goes the leopard. So we're talking about the same beast. The prophet Daniel and the disciple John was pretty much having the same vision about the same thing. We're talking about the same animals here. Go ahead.
After this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it.
Okay.
After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces. It stamped the residue with the feet of it.
Okay, so now the 4th beast, because Daniel saw 4 beasts. And the Lord didn't even have a name in the creation for this beast here. So he just called it dreadful and terrible. So we're going to put dreadful up here in representation of the 4 beasts. What verse was that you was at?
Verse 7.
Go ahead.
After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly.
Mm-hmm.
And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces. And stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns.
Okay, so here we go. So now this beast right here has 10 horns. And that's what we read in Revelation 13th chapter. It talked about the same beast having 10 horns, because this beast is in representation of the same thing. And I'm going to give you a little heads up. It's representation of the same pretty much empire that the Lord is trying to give us heads up about. We're going to skip down to save time, though, to the interpretation of it. And I'm going to have my son skip down to verse 15. And when you get there, go ahead.
I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me.
Mm-hmm.
I came near unto one of them that stood by, and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me, and made me know the interpretation of the things.
Okay, go ahead.
These great beasts, which are 4 kings, which shall arise out of the earth.
So these great beasts, which are 4, what did it say? They are 4 kings. That's what these are in representation of, which shall arise out of the earth. That's why I say when the Bible talks about seas, for the most part, it's talking about peoples, kingdoms, nations, the population of the planet. That's what it's talking about. So these 4 beasts are in representation of 4 kings or kingdoms that will arise up out of the earth. What verse did you read? That was the end of verse 17? Mm-hmm. All right, let's back up to the 2nd chapter of Daniel. So now we understand what these animals are in representation of. They are a representation of 4 kings, 4 kingdoms that the Lord is going to give you prophecy about well before they come into play. Well before they come into play. Well, actually, one of them was already in play at this time, but the other 3 were far off in the future. Far off in the future. We're going to back up to Daniel, the 2nd chapter. We're just going to gather some more information because, like I say all the time, if you read something in the New Testament, you should be really better located in the Old Testament, and it usually gives you a better description of what you're trying to understand. Daniel, the 2nd chapter, and when you get there, start reading at verse 1. Daniel 2 and 1. And we're going to read another dream, or not a dream, but another situation Daniel found himself in, and the Lord gave him information that's going to further help us understand these beasts and these animals, which are in representation of the beast. Because that's what we want to understand first. Before we can understand what the mark is, we must understand who the beast is, because it's his mark. When you get there, though, go ahead. We had Daniel 2 and verse 1. When you get there, go ahead.
And in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him.
Mm-hmm.
Then the king commanded to call the magicians, and the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams.
Mm-hmm.
So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation.
Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and the dream had him messed up for the most part. And so he called all his supposedly wise men, his magicians, his sorcerers, everybody supposed to have some, I guess, spiritual knowledge or power to help him out with the interpretation of the dream. So he called them all in and they asked them what was the dream so they can tell him what it meant. Go ahead.
The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me.
So he says, the thing is gone from me. I can't even remember the dream. So that kind of puts them in a pickle. Go ahead.
If you will not make known unto me the dream, with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill.
So Nebuchadnezzar, he wanted to actually prove their worth. He said, you guys are supposed to have all this spiritual or, magical powers. I can't remember the dream. So not only are you going to tell me what the dream means, you're going to tell me what I dreamed. Because obviously the Lord has taken the dream from him, so he couldn't remember it. But these guys claim to be operating with some type of magical power, so they should be able to do that, you would think. Go ahead.
But if you show the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and the interpretation thereof.
So they either could not show him the dream and they was going to die, or they could show him the dream and the interpretation thereof, and he was going to pretty much reward him for that. But keep going.
They answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it.
Mm-hmm.
The king answered and said, I know of certainty that you would gain the time, because ye see the thing is gone from me.
Mm-hmm.
But if you will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. For ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed.
You see that? Nebuchadnezzar said, he said, nah, because even if I told you the dream, you're going to make something up. You should be able to tell me what I dreamed. So that's what he meant when he said, but if you would not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. For ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the time be changed. Go ahead.
Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that he can show me the interpretation thereof.
Mm-hmm.
The Chaldeans answered before the king, and said, there is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, nor ruler, that asks such things as any magician, or astrologer, or Chaldean.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is none other than that can show it before the king, except the gods, whose dwelling is not with the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
For this cause the king was very angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon.
Okay, so now Nebuchadnezzar he's heated, and so he now say, I'm gonna kill all these so-called wise men, because obviously y'all ain't wise. Y'all just be telling me what I want to hear. You guys are preparing lying words for me, and he wasn't going to deal with it. So he put out a decree to have everyone that claimed to be a wise man or astrologer or magician killed in his entire kingdom. What verse you at?
Verse 13.
Go ahead.
And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain.
Because Daniel and them was considered to be wise men as well. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They was considered to be wise men and men of great counsel also. So obviously they're going to start with the slaves. So now they're going to go ahead and murder or kill Daniel and his friends. Go ahead.
Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty from the king? Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel.
So Arioch told Daniel what was going on. Then what did Daniel say?
Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time, and that he would show the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions.
Okay, that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He went and talked to his friends, and he told them the situation. Pretty much, we finna be killed if we don't come up with an answer to give the king. Go ahead.
That they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven.
Okay, so the Lord revealed this dream and the interpretation to Daniel, because he's actually serving the one and true living God, and God can answer the king's request. Man can't necessarily answer the king's request, but God can. So he gave Daniel the answer overnight in a dream. But at the same time, we're going to get right to the conversation between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. Skip down to verse, let's say, 25, and keep going.
Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah, that will make known unto the king the interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof?
Mm-hmm.
Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king.
So Daniel said, your so-called wise men, they can't give you this. But who can? Verse 28.
But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these.
Okay, go ahead.
As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, and what shall come to pass hereafter.
So Daniel let him know, you pretty much, the Lord gave you a dream about the future. That's what he means when he said to come to pass hereafter. See, that's what God can do. He can tell you the end from the beginning. Go ahead.
And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass.
Mm-hmm.
But as for me, that this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes thou shalt make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart.
Mm-hmm.
Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was made of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay.
Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he had a dream about an image, a great image. And he gives you some information about this image, which I'm going to give you the heads up to. This image is in the same representation of what these beasts represented. So he goes on to say, he said, it said at verse 32, the image's head was of fine gold, and his breast and arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass. Verse 33. Verse 33.
His legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay.
And his legs iron, his feet part iron and part clay. Go ahead.
Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and of clay, and break them to pieces.
Okay, so a stone came from nowhere and smote the image at his feet. Go ahead.
Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth.
Mm-hmm.
This is the dream. We will tell the interpretation thereof before the king.
Okay, so this stone, not only did it smote the image on his feet, but it grew, and it filled the entire earth, he said. But he's going to tell you what all this represents, because this represents the same thing that this beast represents, which are 4 kings. 4 kingdoms that shall come to pass hereafter, or hereafter Nebuchadnezzar in his time, and Daniel at that time. Go ahead.
Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven have given into thine hand, and have made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold.
Okay, so now Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold. Because remember, he had a head of gold. So I guess we'll make a little stick man or something, whatever. Make it work real quick. I ain't gonna get real particular. And the head was gold. And that represented Nebuchadnezzar for the most part. Go ahead. You forgot what verse you was at?
Verse 39.
Go ahead.
And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise.
Okay, so it said it should be another kingdom inferior to thee, which was representation of the silver. And then he goes on to say at verse, and a third kingdom of brass. So we're going to put the brass down here. Because all these...
The legs were iron.
Yeah, we ain't there yet.
Oh.
And we're going to also go on and say we're going to deal with the iron and part clay. And all these, like he said, are in representation of kingdoms that's going to come and rule the earth. That's going to rise up out of the earth and pretty much rule the earth. Now he goes on to tell you that Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold. And what was Nebuchadnezzar the ruler of? He was the ruler of the Babylonian Empire. And that was the first Gentile kingdom to come into power. Like Jesus told us that Jerusalem is going to be trodden down to the time of the Gentiles come to pass. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was the beginning of the time of the Gentiles. What verse did you break off at? Verse 40. That was verse 40, right?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead to verse 41 and keep going.
And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay.
Mm-hmm.
And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom.
And what kings we talking about? He's talking about the part iron and clay kingdom. He said in the days of these kings, the God of heaven is going to set up a kingdom. See, this is going to be 4 Gentile ruling dynasties from the time of Nebuchadnezzar being the first that was going to rule the earth. And God is going to make his coming during the time of these kings, the time of the iron and the clay. And that is the same representation of what we read about this same dreadful and terrible beast that the Lord didn't have no name or didn't have a beast to represent. That's the same, because they are a representation of kingdoms and peoples that's going to rule at one time or another. What verse you at?
The beginning of verse 44.
Read it, start at verse 44 again.
And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms.
So God is going to destroy all the Gentile kingdoms once he come back. Go ahead.
And it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest, the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and in that it break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. So
this is what the Lord is trying to get us to understand. These beasts, this image is all representation of future kingdoms that was going to come to pass. And that's who is going to ultimately have the mark. But it gets a little deeper than that. We're going to try to get a little more understanding. We're going to go to, we're going to go to a history book real quick. We're going to go to the last 2 million years. We're going to go to the last 2 million years. And we're going to trace down each one of these kingdoms in history so that we can understand exactly who these kingdoms are and the order in which they came. We know that the head of gold was the Babylonian Empire, because that's who Nebuchadnezzar was in charge of. But we're going to go to page, last 2 million years, page 56. Page 56. And we're going to, I'm going to have you read pretty much. You got 56?
50. There it is.
Okay. We're going to read what they have titled, what I have highlighted. It's called The Fall of the Empire. This is the last 2 million years by Reader's Digest. It's a history book. And we're going to see if it supports the dreams that Daniel and John had as far as, the ruling empires that was going to come from the sea or going to come from the people, we should say. Last 2 million years, page 56, and read what we have highlighted right there.
The fall of an empire.
Mm-hmm.
Only 14 years after the death of Assurbanipal, this widespread empire collapsed entirely. The strength of his personality had drawn attention away from the forces that were undermining the empire. The overextension of its boundaries, and the drain on the exchequer of continual foreign wars, the rebellion of captive peoples, perhaps even a weakening in the morale of the army due to heavy losses and almost continuous campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the reason, Assyria came to a bloody end, Assyria came to a bloody end, and in the Old Testament, the prophet Nahum exults over the fall of Nineveh.
Okay, so we're talking about the fall of the Assyrian Empire. And, you know, you can read about the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire is the empire that pretty much took out the 10 northern tribes of the children of Israel. And they were pretty much in power. And these were dark-skinned people. These were brown people, for the most part. And they was coming to an end. That's the empire that we're reading about is falling. But keep going.
Well, to the bloody city, it is all full of lies and robbery. The prey departeth not, the noise of a whip, and the noise of rattling of the wheels, and the prancing horses, and the jumping chariots. The horseman lifted up both the bright sword and the glittering spear. And there is a multitude of slain, and a great number of carcasses.
Okay, so they pretty much quoting what the prophet Nahum wrote, I believe, in Nahum, the 3rd chapter. But keep going.
And Nineveh fell in 612 BC after a joint attack by the Babylonians and the Medes. The Assyrian Empire was divided between the victors and the Babylonians under the leadership of Nebuchadnezzar. Took the region to the south and west under his rule. Babylon rose again more than 1,000 years after the age of Hammurabi to become greater than ever. In the 5th century, the Greek historian Herodotus described Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon as surpassing in splendor any city of the known world.
Okay, so the Babylonians, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, knocked out the Assyrians. And that's when the Gentile dynasties came to rule. That's when the Babylonians came into power. That was the beginning of the time of the Gentiles as we know it today, because we are still living in the time of the Gentiles. Gentiles rule this world for the most part. They are the leading power. They are the most powerful group of people that's on the planet at this time. And this was the beginning of that. This is how that all started when Nebuchadnezzar knocked out the Assyrians. He knocked out the Assyrians in 612 BC, and he took power. And he was, what Daniel said, the head of gold, because the Lord gave him the world and everything that was in it. That's what Daniel told him. He said, you are the head of gold. That is you. You are the first ruler of the 4 kingdoms which shall come out of the earth, representing the Gentile dynasties that's going to rule. Skip down to what we got down here and keep going.
The Babylonians also studied the heavens, made star maps, observed the movements of the planets to which they gave names, and tried to predict eclipses of the sun and the moon. The city of Babylon fell in 539 BC to the Medes and Persians. Their joint attack came while the Babylonian king, Belshazzar, last of his line, was giving a great feast, which is vividly described by the prophet Daniel.
Okay, so the Babylonians, they ruled for a time. They say Belteshazzar, I believe, as his grandson. Well, anyway, after the Babylonians ruled for a while, who did they say picked up after them?
The Medes and Persians.
The Medes and Persians. That was the kingdom that we just read about in Daniel that was inferior to Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian empire in representation of the silver that the prophet was given the interpretation of the dream of. And they actually referred us to what the prophet Daniel wrote about Nebuchadnezzar. And we're going to go there. Let's go to Daniel, the 5th chapter. Let's go to Daniel, the 5th chapter. And we're going to trace down all these kingdoms and what they and their direct correspondence to these beasts. So we know Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold. So we can get that out of there. And the next kingdom was the Medes and the Persians. I'm just going to put Medes there because they took power after the Babylonian Empire fell. And that's what Daniel is going to tell you about in this chapter. Daniel, the 5th chapter. And when you get there, we're going to start reading at verse 1. Daniel 5 and verse 1. When you get there, go ahead.
Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem. that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein.
Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar, when he took over the world at one point one time, he ended up raiding Jerusalem and took us into slavery as well. But as he was doing that, he took all the golden vessels that Solomon had put in the temple, he brought them back to Babylon. Well, his descendant Belshazzar took it upon himself to go get those things out of wherever he had them hidden in the treasury, I believe. And they decided to drink out of them and pretty much misuse them. See, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't that crazy. But go ahead.
Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes and his wives and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. And the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the placer of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote.
Okay, so while they was doing all this foolishness, the Lord sent a hand out of nowhere. Just a hand just popped up and started writing on the wall. Go ahead.
Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another.
So now he terrified, his knees beating up each other. Go ahead.
The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, Whosoever shall read this writing and shew me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom.
So now he's looking, just like his father was looking, for somebody to explain to him what this writing is on the wall, that this hand appeared out of nowhere, just started writing. So he's asking all his people to explain it to him, and he's offering rewards for the explanation. What verse you at?
Verse 8.
Go ahead.
Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonied. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the kings, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers.
So pretty much his mother is telling him about, no, she's telling him, or his queen, I'm saying, is telling him about Daniel. She said, oh, there is a guy that can probably tell you. Because a long time ago, your father had a problem, or your grandfather had a problem, and Daniel was able to explain to him what his dream was. Not only explain to him, but tell him his dream. So naturally, they're going to go get Daniel now, because they're trying to get the interpretation of his writing that just popped up on the wall with his hand that nobody can explain. But at the same time, we're going to skip down to the 24th verse, and we're going to keep going. When you get there, go ahead.
And there was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God have numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Pharis, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
Thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So this was pretty much bringing to the end of the Babylonian Empire, the Babylonian kingdom that was going to be the first ruling kingdom of the four kingdoms, which we already understand was the head of gold, and in representation was also the lion. So that's coming to an end, and it's given to the Medes and Persians. That's who that kingdom was given to. Go ahead.
They commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. And that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old.
So that night he was killed because he did that foolishness with the temple artifacts, or the cups and stuff that the Lord had already had sanctified. And he was killed, and Darius the Median took the kingdom. So that is the beginning of the second kingdom, that of the four kings that we read about, that's going to rule the earth. And you can read, we read about it in history, and we read about it also in the Bible, because the Bible is sure, and history backs up the Bible. The Bible don't back up history. History backs up the Bible. And that was the next kingdom to come into power. That was the next kingdom to come into power. But we're going to keep going. Let's go to Daniel, the 8th chapter. Because all these kingdoms had to rise and fall. And as we read earlier, the Lord is going to come in the time of the last kingdom, the time of the iron and the clay, the time of the dreadful and terrible beast that the Lord is predicting is going to come upon the earth. Daniel, the 8th chapter, and when you get there, start reading at verse 1. Daniel 8 and verse 1. When you get there, go ahead.
In the 3rd year, the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last.
Okay, so he said he saw a ram that had 2 horns, and the 2 horns was high, and the higher came up last, and one of the horns was higher than the others. In representation of this was a kingdom, which I'm letting you know now is the Medes and the Persians. They was a split kingdom, and the Persian Empire was actually the more powerful of the two. Note, Cyrus the Great was one of the most powerful emperors to ever rule the earth. And he was a Persian king, Persian emperor. Go ahead, though.
I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great.
This is the ram. This is representation of the Medes and Persians. And he was pretty much, could nobody stop him. While his time to rule was time, he was unbeatable. See, but the Lord, he's the one that bring kingdoms and bring kings up, and he's the one that bring kingdoms and bring kings down. So everybody had a time, and the Lord has given you everybody time in order. Go ahead, though. We're going to let the Bible say it. Go ahead. What verse you at?
Verse 5.
Go ahead.
And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes.
Okay, he-goat come from nowhere, and he had a notable horn between his eyes. Go ahead.
And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran up unto him in the fury of his power. So
this he-goat with this notable horn between his eyes rushed the ram. Go ahead.
And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. So this he-goat, he whooped on the ram, stomped on the ram. Go ahead. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. Okay, so after the he-goat whooped on the ram, his great horn was broken, and in place of that horn, 4 notable horns came up. And this is also in representation of the next ruling empire, because the ram is in representation of the Medo-Persian Empire. That's why he had 2 horns, the second horn being the higher, because the Persians was more powerful than the Medes during their time of ruling. But at the same time, we're going to get to the interpretation that the Bible explains, because we just still breaking down this beast and what it represents, so we can know exactly what the mark stands for. Skip down to verse 15 and keep going. And it came to pass, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and saw for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. Okay, so now the prophet Daniel is wondering what the vision means between the ram and the goat whooping on the ram, and the horn breaking and 4 notables rising up. So now the angel Gabriel is going to tell him what all that means. Verse 17, go ahead. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be division. Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground. But he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and of Persia. So the ram which y'all saw us having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. That's the second empire that took power after the Babylonian Empire fell.
Remember we read Belshazzar was killed and Darius the Mede took over, and the Medes and the Persians, they ruled together. They was the second empire that was inferior to the Babylonian Empire, because none of these empires actually ruled with the power that Nebuchadnezzar ruled with, because the Lord gave it to him. Gave it to him outright. So he said right there, what verse was that again?
Verse 20.
He said, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. Go ahead.
And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king.
And the rough goat that came and whooped on the ram is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes was the first king. What was the first king of Greece? He was none other than Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great. So now, since we know this, we can take the Medes and the Persians off. Because see, now we've seen this empire come and go, just like we've seen the Babylonian Empire come and go. And now it's the time of the Greeks. And you can read all this in history, and we're going to read a little bit of it. It's the time of the Greeks. So now the bear is gone. And just for a little background knowledge, the Medes and the Persians in the rough general area where they at, you know, they are pretty much what we would call, for the most part, I would say, like common day, like, you know, Russia and that general area. And if you know anything about Russia, they are called the bear to this day. So these references are true even unto this day. But now we at the Greeks, because he's the he-goat, and that one notable horn is the first king, and I'm telling you right now, that represents Alexander the Great, which we're going to let history show us that. What verse you at, 22?
Yes.
Keep going.
Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, for a kingdom shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power.
And he was broken, and four stood up in his place. And I'm letting you know now, when Alexander died, he didn't have an heir. So his four generals split his kingdom up, which he ruled the world, and they split into four parts. And by doing so, they was never as powerful as he was, because they split into four parts. But we're going to read a little bit about that in history. We're going to go to the Zondervan Atlas of the Bible, page 180. The Zondervan Atlas of the Bible, page 180. And we're going to let the history back up what we can read in the Bible. 180, and we're going to read something titled The Arrival of the Greeks. And it's going to tell us it's going to support exactly what we read in the Bible, exactly what Daniel had written well before this stuff even happened. Because you got to realize Daniel was writing this stuff right here. He wrote this in the time of Belshazzar. This is still the Babylonian Empire in power here. So the Medes and Persians haven't even took over yet. But we're going to get there. Let's go to the Zondervan, like I said, Atlas of the Bible, page 180, and we're going to read what we have, what I got highlighted, titled The Arrival of the Greeks. You can go ahead and start when you get there.
The arrival of the Greeks. During the 6th, 5th, and 4th centuries BC, the power of the various Greek city-states was growing to such an extent that they were beginning to challenge Persian supremacy in Asia Minor and elsewhere.
So who was they challenging? They was challenging Persia, because that's who they knocked off. That's the he-goat that knocked off the ram, which was the Persians. They was the second of the two ruling empires of the Medes and the Persians. So for Greece to take over, they had to knock the Persians off. Start it over again, I'm sorry.
From the beginning?
Yeah.
During the 6th, 5th, and 4th centuries BC, the power of the various Greek city-states was growing to such an extent that they were beginning to challenge Persian supremacy in Asia Minor and elsewhere. The Persians, who had invaded Greece, were kept at bay by the Greek forces, which defeated them. First at Marathon in 490 BC, and then 10 years later at Salamis. Through the remainder of the 5th century, and during the first 2/3 of the 4th, the Greeks encouraged anti-Persian activities in Egypt, the Levant, and Asia Minor. But the extent of the territory under Persian rule in these areas remained virtually unchanged. By the middle of the 4th century BC, Philip II solidified his position as ruler of Macedonia in northern Greece. During his life, he worked toward the two great goals: the unification of the Greek city-states under his rule and the overthrow of the Persians. In the process of unifying Greece, he built his Macedonian army into a small but formidable fighting force. Unfortunately, Philip was assassinated in 336 BC after having completed plans for his invasion of Asia Minor.
Okay, so Philip the Macedonian, he was one of the rulers of Macedonia, and he was the father of Alexander the Great, and he was getting all the tribes of Greece together, trying to form one unified country army, but he ended up being assassinated. Go ahead.
At the time of his death, his son, Alexander the Great, was well positioned to carry out his father's dreams. Although only 20 years old at the time, Alexander had been prepared for his new position as leader of Macedon. He had been educated by the Greek philosopher Aristotle, and had led campaigns on behalf of his father during his teenage years.
Okay, so Alexander, he's the first king because his father never really brought all the kingdoms together, but Alexander was able to complete his father's mission. And he brought all the kingdoms together, and he started attacking the Persians. Keep going.
Alexander began his invasion of Asia Minor by crossing the Dardanelles in 334 BC. Alexander defeated the Persian satraps of Asia Minor at the Granicus River, and then marched south through the provinces of Mysia, Lydia, Caria, Lycia, and Pamphylia in a counterclockwise direction. At Gordium, the ancient capital of Phrygia, he met Parmenio, his general, who had proceeded directly from Sardis to Gordium. The Greeks crushed resistance along both routes, captured cities, secured treasuries, and replaced Persian overlords. Alexander proceeded from Gordium southeast to Tarsus, the capital of Cilicia, via Ankara and the Sicilian Gates. Continuing around the northeastern corner of the Mediterranean Sea, he passed through the Syrian Gates and the Amanus Mountains before realizing that Darius, the Persian monarch, had assembled a large army at Issus behind him.
Okay, so Alexander, he's going through, for the most part, knocking off Persian spots. So now while he's knocking off Persian spots, the emperor of Persia, Darius, has snuck up behind him with a big old army. Go ahead.
Retracing his steps, Alexander met and defeated Darius III at the Battle of Issus in 333 BC. In spite of considerable losses, Darius was able to flee eastward and began to regroup his forces for a later battle with Alexander.
Okay, so the Bible let us know that he-goat was going to whoop on Persia, and that's exactly what history is letting us know. It's showing us that Alexander went all through the territories ruled by Persia. They talk about Asia Minor, that's modern day Turkey, and Levant, that's pretty much where the Holy Land is. They had different names for it by this time. So he's all in that general area, knocking off Persian establishment. By doing so, the Persian emperor met him with a great army, and Alexander knocked them off too. Just like Daniel predicted that he would. Where you at?
But it's not highlighted.
Okay, I think I got some more stuff highlighted. So Alexander's doing his thing, but we're gonna skip to read some more, because remember, he was broken at some point, because he started this at 20. But that notable horn was broken, and 4 stood up in his place. So we're gonna make sure that we pick that up as well. Go ahead.
Alexander continued his march eastward into the northeastern portions of the Persian Empire to the area of modern Afghanistan and Kashmir, and then headed south into the Indus Valley in modern Pakistan. When his troops refused to continue east into India, he embarked on a difficult march west through the deserts and mountains of southern Persia, modern Iran, to Babylon. Alexander may have intended to make Babylon the capital of his empire, although this is not certain. But before he was able to enjoy the fruits of a mature empire, he died in Babylon.
He died in Babylon. Ain't that coincidental? The beginning of it all is where he died. Go ahead.
He in 332 and 323 BC, at the age of 32.
He died at 32. He was young. That's why I said it said as soon as the he-goat waxed great, that great horn was broken. Go ahead.
It was years before the full impact of his conquest took effect. But it is worth noting here that near the east was radically changed with the arrival of Greek language and culture. Because Alexander died without leaving a designated successor, a number of his generals and regents quarreled over whether the kingdom should remain a united whole or whether it should be divided among the competing powers.
And that's exactly what they did. 4 stood up in its place, And they was his 4 generals. Go ahead.
In 320 BC, Ptolemy I annexed Palestine into Egypt.
Okay, so Ptolemy, he pretty much took everything from the Holy Land of Egypt. That was one of his generals. Go ahead.
Following the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC, in which Antigonus and his allies were defeated.
Okay, Antigonus was another one of his generals. He took an area of himself. Go ahead.
There was a period of relative peace during which time Antipater and Cassander were established in Macedonia and Greece.
Okay, so Cassander, which was another one of his generals, he pretty much took over their homeland. Go ahead.
Lysimachus in Thrace and Asia Minor, Seleucus first in Syria, Mesopotamia, and Persia.
And Seleucus was another one of his generals that took over. So that was his 4 generals, Cassander, Ptolemy, Antigonus, and Seleucus, that split his kingdom up into 4 parts, showing us that what we read in the Bible is true. 4 stood up, but not in his power. Representing the Greek Empire, which was the brass, and in representation, in Revelation, the leopard. So now we seeing that empire pretty much coming to a close. We're going to go back to the Bible. Let's go to Daniel, the 7th chapter. Daniel, the 7th chapter. Because it was 4. Daniel, the 7th chapter, and we're going to go back to where we left off at. And we're going to read verse 7 again. Daniel 7 and verse 7. When you get there, go ahead. Daniel 7 and verse 7.
After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces.
Okay, so now we at this last beast that the Lord didn't even have an animal to represent. Dreadful and terrible. And remember, in the time of this beast, is the Lord supposed to set up his kingdom. So this beast is still around to this day because God ain't came back, people. He is still around to this day. Because remember, the stone came and smote the image. Make a little stone here, make it a little rocky. And smote the image on his feet. And that was representation of Christ's kingdom. And that was going to fill the entire earth as Christ is going to do in the latter days. But go ahead, read verse 7 again.
And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things.
Okay, so now we get some characteristics about this last dreadful and terrible beast. And out of this beast ultimately came up one little horn speaking great things. Speaking great things. He a big talker. Now let's figure out who took rule after the Greeks. Let's go back to the last 2 million years, but this time we go on to page 104. The last 2 million years, and this time we're going to page 104. And when you get there, you're going to start reading what I have highlighted. Read the title and go ahead.
The Shadow of Rome.
The Shadow of Rome. That is the 4th and final beast that is still around to this day. The world just don't even recognize it. Because remember, it was wounded. Read it again, I'm sorry.
The Shadow of Rome. The great struggle between Rome and Carthage, which dominated the West Mediterranean during much of the Hellenistic age, came to an end in 146 BC with a total victory for the Romans. With the destruction of Carthage, Rome was free to turn her attention to the eastern Mediterranean. Mainland Greece soon became a Roman protectorate. And during the 1st century BC, Rome gradually absorbed Asia Minor.
So now Rome, they're starting their military conquest. They knocked off Carthage, which if I'm correct was northern Africa. And once they did that, they turned their attention to the Greeks. And they are going to take over. Now they taking over Asia Minor, which is pretty much Turkey and all the countries around it. Because it's their time to rule. They're the fourth empire. Go ahead.
And Syria, Judea, and nearly all the remnants of Alexander's Eastern Empire, culturally, however, it was the Romans who were absorbed, as the poet Horace wrote, captive, Greece made captive her rude conqueror.
Okay, so now we see who's coming up next. It was the Romans. But let's go back to the Bible. Let's go to Daniel, the 2nd chapter. See, the Lord had all this stuff prophesied by his prophets. He had all these things prophesied. The Lord does not leave you in obscurity. He told you all the ruling empires before they came. Now, we read about them in the Bible. Most of them was named by name. The Medes, the Persians, the Greeks, he named them by name. He named the Babylonians by name because that was the time in which Daniel wrote these things. And he told you in the order in which they was going to come. And we just read in history backing up exactly what the Bible told you. Daniel, the 2nd chapter. And when you get there, I want you to start reading that verse 40. Daniel 2 and verse 40. He's going to tell you about this fourth kingdom again. Go ahead.
And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron. For as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken.
The kingdom, so the kingdom is going to go through a little turmoil. It was going to be wounded, as we read in Revelation. Go ahead.
And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay.
Okay, go ahead.
And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom.
And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. See, that's how we know Rome is still in power to this day. They're still in Europe in power until this day. And we know who they are a representation of, because when you look at the European Common Market, what do they have to sign to join the EU? The Treaty of Rome. They still under the Roman pretty much banner for the most part. Because all those kingdoms, Greece and Germany and Spain and France, all those monarchs became monarchs because the Pope made them monarchs. And the Pope is part of the Roman Catholic Church. He's that little horn speaking great things. But we're going to let the Bible explain it to you. What verse are you at?
Verse 44.
Go ahead.
And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. And it shall stand forever.
And it shall stand forever. Go ahead.
For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure.
And the interpretation is sure, because we've backed up everything Daniel told you about the four ruling empires, the four beasts, and what they represent, not only in the Bible, but in history. History shows you that the Bible didn't tell you nothing wrong. Because the Lord can tell you the end from the beginning. Let's go back to the last 2 million years. We're gonna get some more information about this last beast, which we know is Rome. Let's go to the last 2 million years. This time we're going to go to page 215. 215. And we're going to, I'm going to have them read what we have highlighted right here. Yeah, we're going to read what we got highlighted under the Middle Ages and the end of an era. Go ahead.
For 400 years, the Roman Empire gave unity and security to the Mediterranean world and to Europe up to, and at times beyond, the Rhine, after the final collapse of Rome in 476, when its last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was disposed by the Goths under the leadership of Odoacer, the Christian Church gave Europe a similar measure of unity for the next 1,000 years. The Pope was more powerful than the barbarian kings who tried to recreate the Roman Empire. For the Pope claimed his authority descended from St. Peter, to whom Christ has said, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church."
Okay, so what they telling you about Rome? Because remember, this final beast, it was wounded. And in 476, the last Roman emperor was taken out. But then here come the time of the popes. And the Pope took over. And he was the most powerful on the planet. And he is still probably the most powerful on the planet. There's over 1 billion Catholics right now, people. See, that's how we know we're still in the time of the Roman Empire. There's 1 billion plus Catholics on this planet. Outright Catholics. Not to mention all the Sunday religious people, Sunday Christians that derive from Catholicism. So they have the numbers. They have the numbers by far. And we are under their rulership through religion. That's how we're under their rulership. Through religion. And the Bible let you know that was going to be the case. Let's go to Revelation, the 19th chapter. Revelation, the 19th chapter. We just breaking down who this beast is and where this mark is going to come from. You can't understand the mark until you know who it's coming from. So after Rome fell as a military power, it became more or less a religious power in which it has taken power of the entire world. Of the entire world. And even if you look right now in Europe right now, the Pope is still gaining more and more power to this day. They turned back to him not too long ago for guidance because prophecy is sure, as Daniel said. We have Revelation, and we're going to start reading at verse 11. Revelation, the 19th chapter, and we're going to start reading at verse 11, I believe. I think this is where I want to be. Yeah, go ahead. Start reading at verse 11.
And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he doth judge and make war.
Mm-hmm.
His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. And he had a name written that no man knew but he himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God.
So we know this is none other than Jesus, because he's the Word of God. And we got to remember, in the time of these kings, in the time of Rome, in the time of this dreadful and terrible beast, see, that's why the Lord ain't have no beast in the animal kingdom to represent them, because they wasn't just going to destroy you physically, they were going to destroy you spiritually. And that's worse than destroying the people physically, because they destroying you spiritually is going to cause you to burn in hell forever. That's worse than you just being killed for a time. That's why they the dreadful and terrible beast. And that's why Christ is going to have to come back during the time of these kings, as we read. But at the same time, skip down to verse 16 and keep going.
And he hath on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, Come and gather yourselves together unto the supper of the great God, that ye may eat the flesh of the kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and of them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, both small and great.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse, and against his army.
And that's what they're going to do in the last days. They're going to actually try to fight Christ when he come back. But go ahead.
And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet.
And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet. Because, see, when it comes down to the end, it's going to be two rulers pretty much. You're going to have military leader, whoever's going to be over the Roman Empire of the time. And you also and he's going to be pretty much taking his orders from the spiritual leader, which is the false prophet. He's the horn that's speaking great things. So he said, read that verse again, verse 20.
And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worship his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire, burning with brimstone.
So that's what the Lord is going to do to them when he make his second coming. He's going to put those two individuals, the military leader and the spiritual leader, who we know is the Pope. We don't know who the military leader is going to be yet. And I'm pretty sure it probably ain't going to be this Pope here, but it's going to be that office, as we going to see. And they're going to have the world take a mark, it says, and he's going to throw them in the fire burning with brimstone. Now let's go to Daniel the 7th chapter. Daniel told you the same exact thing. Go back to Daniel the 7th chapter. Daniel the 7th chapter. And we're going to see if he's saying the same, because they're talking about the same time, people. Daniel, the 7th chapter, and when you get there, start reading at verse 9. And just pay attention. Go ahead.
I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like the pure wool, and his throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire.
Mm-hmm.
A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened.
This is Jesus right here, making the second coming. Go ahead.
I beheld them because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake.
The horn, we talking about the false prophet. He's the one that's going to be able to do miracles and things like that. He's the one that's leading the world through this false religion, people. God says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. On the 7th day, rested. Rome tells you, no, the first day is the Sabbath day. He's the one speaking blasphemy, as we read earlier. So he said, and I beheld, then because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. Go ahead.
I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed, and given to the burning flame.
And given to the burning flame. What did the Lord say he was going to do? He said he was going to put them in a burning fire of fire and brimstone. Now let's go back to Revelation the 13th chapter and read it in its entirety. And now that we know who this beast represents, we can try to make some sense of it and try to figure out this mark. Revelation the 13th chapter. Because this beast is only in representation of ruling empires. And it's all represents the Gentile dynasties. People that was going to rule starting at Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Empire, leading on to the Medo-Persian Empire, leading on to the Greek Empire, ultimately ending with the Roman Empire that's still around to this day. They have not been taken out because instead of having their military might, they destroyed the world spiritually with false religion. So let's go back to that. Romans the 13th chapter. And we're going to read it in its entirety with a little understanding now that we know what we're talking about. And we'll be able to map out who this mark is, what this mark is, and what it's in representation of. Revelation 13. And when you get there, start reading at verse 1. Revelation 13 and verse 1. When you get there, go ahead.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy.
Mm-hmm.
And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard.
He's like unto a leopard. See, Rome is pretty much the ending of the Gentile dynasties. So you got to put the leopard in there. And we know that was Greece. Go ahead.
And his feet were as the feet of a bear.
You got to put the bear in there because this is all part of the Gentile dynasty. These peoples that's going to rule the earth during this time. And we know that was the Medes and the Persians. Go ahead.
And his mouth, in his mouth is the mouth of a lion.
And we know the lion represents the Babylonian Empire. All these are all the Gentile dynasties combined that's going to ultimately lead you to the Roman Empire, which is going to take bits and pieces from all the ones before it. It's going to take bits and pieces from all the ones before. Go ahead.
And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority.
And he's getting his power directly from Satan. Go ahead.
And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast.
And he was wounded because like we read, I think in 476, Romulus Augustus was knocked out. But instead of Rome falling off the map completely, they took over spiritually. And the Pope stood up in his place. Go ahead.
And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who was like unto the beast, who was able to make war with him.
And see, because the Pope is working directly, or Satan is working directly through this individual. He's working directly through him. Go ahead.
And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months.
That's doing great tribulation, but he's been blaspheming for years. Since the beginning of the post, he's been blaspheming. God says one thing, he gives you another. God says do something, keep the feast of unleavened bread, he gives you Easter. Because that's blasphemy. That's against God. Go ahead.
And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwelt in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And the power is given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations.
Mm-hmm.
And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship them, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
Mm-hmm.
If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword.
Mm-hmm.
Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and caused the earth to, and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed.
You see that? See that? See, it's gonna be a 2-headed beast that's gonna come out of the beast because the beast is wounded now, but he's being healed right now. And it's gonna be a 2-headed pretty much rulership. You're gonna have a military guy and you're gonna have a false prophet, in whom the Lord, when he comes back, is gonna throw them immediately into the lake of fire. That's what he's talking about. And I beheld another beast coming up out the earth, had 2 horns like a lamb, and spake as a dragon. Which means, how you speak as a dragon? With lies and deceit. That's what Satan does. Satan has deceived the entire world. And Rome has deceived the entire world through its false religion, having you believe that the practices that they give you are righteous, having you believe that the things they tell you about God is true. But it's blasphemy. You can't read it in the Bible, none of the stuff that they're giving you. Go ahead.
And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed.
Because it's all still wrong. It's all still wrong. Go ahead.
And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men,
Mm-hmm.
and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword, and did live.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the power to give life unto the image of the beast, and that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed.
Mm-hmm.
And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads.
Okay, so not only is he gonna have power, but he's gonna have the power to kill you if you don't bow down to what he's telling you to do. And then he goes on to say, and he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Go ahead.
And that no man might buy or sell, save he that hath the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name.
Mm-hmm.
Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 603 score and 6.
So his number is 603 score and 6. So the Lord gave you a way to identify the mark. And like I said, I gave you the information already. I didn't want to get too deep into history. But the false prophet is none other than the Pope. He's the one that's going to be pretty much, telling you what to do and causing you and forcing you to worship this image. And the official title of the Pope in Latin, which is the official language of the Roman Catholic Church, is Vic, or in English, the Vicar of Christ. But in Roman, it is, try to write it a little smaller so I can get it all on there. It's Vicarius Filii Dei. And a lot of people that's been around, they know this already, but I'm going to write it up here anyway. Like I said, y'all got to excuse my handwriting. You got to excuse my handwriting. I ain't the neatest writer. Vicarius. I think it's got 2 eyes in there, right? Yeah. This is the Pope's official title, which means Vicar of Christ or replacement of Christ. So when the Lord tells you at verse 18, here is wisdom, let him that have understanding count the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man, and the number is 603 score and 6. So when you take this name or the Pope's official title, and you add up the Roman numerals, because they use Roman numerals, V equals 5, I is 1, C is 100, A is A and R don't have a numerical value, if I'm correct. I is still 1. U is the same as V in the Roman language. They really only got V, but they write it as U as well. So that will be 5 again. And S doesn't have a numerical value. Then we go to the F. He doesn't have a numerical value. We got the I, which we know is 1. We got the L, which is 50. We got the I, which is 1. The I, which is 1. We got the D, which I believe is 500, right? Yeah. The D is 500. The E doesn't have a numerical value. And the I is 1. Now, you can look that up on your own time, add it up when you got some time. But when you add all these numbers up, you get that man. You get 666, exactly the number of the man that the Lord was telling you about. Because he's the one that's going to be ultimately causing people to take this mark. The office of none other than the Pope. And a lot of people know this already, but I put it up there for those who don't know. Now, the problem we have is a lot of people would have you believe that, the mark is simply just a physical mark. Because what he said he's going to have you take it, he said you have to take it in your right hand on your forehead. But I will let you know that the mark does not necessarily have to be physical, people. See, the problem with him is not his physical nature. It's his spiritual nature. It's the information that he's giving you. It's the traditions and the practices he's telling you to do. That's the problem. And that's how you ultimately take the mark. See, people will have you believe, some people have you believe that you just got to worry about not taking nothing physical. Now, I'm not going to tell you it won't never be nothing physical, but I will let you know that this has a lot of spiritual implications as well. And we're going to show you how that, or show you that it's true by reading the Bible. Because mark does not necessarily mean physical, as I told you earlier. Let's go to Genesis, the 4th chapter. And let's show you, because the Lord been putting marks on people. This is not the first time a mark was given. Let's go to Genesis, the 4th chapter. Genesis, the 4th chapter. And when you get there, I'm going to have you start reading at verse 8. Genesis 4 and verse 8. And just pay attention to what the Lord said about Cain here. When you get there, go ahead.
And Cain talked with Abel, his brother. And it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and slew him.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel, thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood hath cried unto me from the ground. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand.
Mm-hmm. So Cain killed Abel, and the Lord is dealing with him because of that. Skip down to verse, now let's keep going. Let's keep on reading.
When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee. Her strength, a fugitive and a vagabond, shalt thou be in the earth.
So he's cursing Cain for killing Abel. Go ahead.
And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth. And from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And it shall come to pass that everyone that findeth me shall slay me.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord said unto him, Therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him.
And so the Lord put a mark upon Cain, so that any finding him would not kill him, so he can live his days out cursed. So the Lord put a mark upon him. Was that a physical mark? Of course not. It's a spiritual mark. And being that angels are the ones that control anyway, being that they are the ones pulling the strings behind the scene anyway, they were going to make sure nothing happened to Cain, so he can live out his years cursed. And you can see that when we go to Ezekiel, the 9th chapter. Because this was a bad mark that the Lord put on Cain. Just like it's a bad mark that's going to be put on the people in the last days from this false prophet who we know is the Pope. Let's go to Ezekiel, the 9th chapter. Pay attention to another mark that the Lord had put on people. Ezekiel, the 9th chapter. See, all the mark is a means of identifying someone or something. So when the Lord say that you're going to have the mark of the beast in your hand and your forehead, he's going to make a means for him to identify you. Just like he made a means for Cain to be identified on a spiritual level. Not physical, but on a spiritual level. And you're going to see that here. Ezekiel 9, and when you get there, start reading that verse 1. Ezekiel 9 and verse 1. When you get there, go ahead.
He cried also in mine ears with a loud voice, saying, cause them that have charge of the city to draw near, even with every man with his destroying weapon in his hand.
Mm-hmm.
And behold, 6 men came from the way of the higher gate, which lieth toward the north. And every man a slaughter weapon in his hand, and one man among them was clothed with linen, with a writer's inkhorn by his side. And they went in and stood beside the brazen altar.
Okay, so the Lord got these angels doing certain things, and a bunch of them got weapons, and one of them got an inkhorn in his hand. Something to write with. Go ahead.
And the glory of the God of Israel was gone up from the cherub, whereupon he was to the threshold of the house, and he called to the man's clothes with linen, which hath the writer's inkhorn by his side.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord said unto him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof.
You see that? So during this time, he said, put a mark among all the men that are aggravated to hell with the folly and the idolatry that was going on in the land at that time. So he would recognize them from everybody else. Would that mean he walking around writing on their foreheads? Of course not. Angels don't walk around writing on people's foreheads. But that is in representation of a spiritual identification method. Go ahead.
And to the others he said in mine hearing, go ye after him through the city and smite, let not your eyes spare, neither have ye pity.
So whoever did have the mark, whoever wasn't upset and wasn't caught up in the idolatry and the abomination that was going on in the land, they were killed. They were killed by the angels. And the same thing is going to happen in the last days. Nothing is new. Go ahead, verse 6.
Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children, and women, but come not near any man upon whom is the mark, and begin in my sanctuary. Then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. And he said unto them, defile the house, and fill the courts with the slain. Go ye forth. And they went forth, and slew in the city. And it came to pass, while they were slaying them, and I was left, that I fell upon my face, and cried, and said, Ah, Lord God, wilt thou destroy all the residue of Israel, and thy pouring out of thy fury upon Jerusalem?
You see, because there was a lot of people caught up with the abomination. And Ezekiel would get a vision of what was going to come to pass in the last days. And he was crying to God, like, you going to kill all of us? You going to kill all of us? But all that didn't have the mark was going to be killed. And all that was just the way for the Lord to identify you. That's all that was. The way for the Lord to identify you. Let's go to Revelation, the 14th chapter. Let's go to Revelation, the 14th chapter. And just pay attention to this right here. Revelation, the 14th chapter. And start reading at verse 1. Revelation 14 and verse 1. When you get there, go ahead.
And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood in the Mount Sion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads.
Okay, go ahead.
And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung as it were a new song before the throne, and before the 4 beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song, but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth.
Okay, so these people, they had the Father's mark in their forehead, and these were righteous men. Keep going.
These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb.
Mm-hmm.
And in their mouth was found no guile, for they were without fault before the throne of God. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell in the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of waters. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, and that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication.
You see, what did she make her drink of? The wine of the wrath of her fornication. That false doctrine that she's been polluting the earth with. That's the problem. That's what's going to make you a mark. That's what's going to get you the mark. Not necessarily no physical thing. It's your spiritual attitude, which is what the Lord is going to identify you by. Keep going.
And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast in his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation.
So if you caught up with that and you take that mark, or you have that mark in your head or your forehead on your hand, you're automatically gonna get the damnation or the condemnation God has for the Satan and his angels. That's what he's letting you know right there. And that is none other than the lake of fire. He's going to tell you, keep going.
And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb.
Mm-hmm.
And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever.
Forever and ever. Go ahead.
And they have no rest, nor day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name.
Who worship the beast and his image, and receiveth the mark of his name. See, the Lord is the one that's going to be out there giving the mark, people. He's the one that needs to identify you, whether you was on that foolery or was you willing to stand strong and do what he told you to do. See, that's the problem. That's what's going to make the Lord identify you, good or bad. Your actions, the things you're doing, who you worshiping, who you serving. Go ahead.
Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God in the faith of Jesus.
You got to keep the commandments. Let's back to the 13th chapter. Real good. We're going to go back to the 13th chapter. And start reading at verse 15. We're going to read that again. Go ahead.
And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed.
Mm-hmm.
And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that hath the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom.
Okay, so it's going to be in your hand and your forehead, right? Now let's pay attention to something. Let's go back to Deuteronomy, the 6th chapter. See, because like we say all the time, it's nothing new under the sun, people. There's nothing new under the sun. And the Lord has been marking people. The Lord has been finding ways to identify you. And he used the same identification methods way back in the Old Testament with the children of Israel. The same identification methods. It was just worded a little different. Deuteronomy, the 6th chapter. And when you get there, start reading at verse 4. Deuteronomy 6 and verse 4. When you get there, go ahead.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might.
Mm-hmm.
And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart.
And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thy heart. He just said, here's the patience of the saints, those who keep the commandments. Go ahead.
And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up.
Mm-hmm.
And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes.
You see that? He said, thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. What's between your eyes, people? Your forehead. That's how the Lord identified the children of Israel as servants or not. Your actions, your obedience to his laws, statutes, and commandments caused a mark to be put upon you, a spiritual mark upon thine hand and between thine eyes. The only thing between thine eyes is thy forehead, people. See, this mark has a lot of spiritual implications. It's not necessarily physical. See, people worried about, well, as long as I don't take a computer chip or as long as I don't get something on my forehead like Ash Wednesday. No, you better not be following that foolishness they tell you to do. See, just going along with it, going along with what they have going on is going to cause you to be marked by God, people. Just like going along with what the Lord has going on gave you a mark in the same exact locations. But it was a good mark, like the good mark that was given in the days of Ezekiel to the ones that was against the abominations the children of Israel was dealing with. But that was because they kept the commandments. Let's read it again. Let's go to Exodus 13th chapter. Exodus 13th chapter. Exodus 13th chapter. See, that mark ain't physical, people. That mark has a whole lot of spiritual implications. See, your actions, your behavior is what's going to cause you to get the mark. It's not necessarily got to be nothing physical. It don't have to be nothing physical. But if you're going along with the status quo, if you pledge your allegiance to the status quo, then you got that mark as well. That's what the Lord is letting you know. Exodus the 13th chapter, and just start reading that verse 1. See, he told the children way back in the wilderness right here. Go ahead.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of beast, it is mine.
Mm-hmm.
And Moses said unto the people, Remember this day in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by the strength of the hand of the Lord brought you out from this place. There shall no leavened bread be eaten. This day came ye out of the mouth in the month Abib. And it shall be when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he sware unto thy fathers to give thee, a land flowing with milk and honey, that thou shalt keep this service in this month.
So he's giving them pretty much the ordinance of the Feast of Unleavened Bread for the most part. Go ahead.
7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and in the 7th day shall be a feast to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and there shall be no leavened bread be seen with thee. Neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all thy quarters.
Mm-hmm.
And thou shalt show thy son in that day, saying, This is done because of that which the Lord did unto me when I came forth out of Egypt. And it shall be for a sign unto thee upon thine hand, and for a memorial between thine eyes, that the Lord's law may be in thy mouth. For with a strong hand hath the Lord brought thee out of Egypt.
You see that? He said, keeping the ordinance of the unleavened bread, he said, it shall be a sign upon thee, upon thine hand. He wasn't talking about writing on their hand. He was talking about what your obedience represents and how he's going to identify you. He said, and it shall be for a sign upon thee, upon thine hand, and for a memorial between thy eyes. There go that forehead again. There go that forehead all over again. But what is you getting marked for? Your obedience to what the Lord tells you to do. Just like your obedience to doing what they tell you to do is going to cause you to have a mark in the same exact space. And all that is a means for the Lord to identify you. Because that's what a mark ultimately is. It's not necessarily something physical, people. They would have you believe it's just something physical, but that's not always the case. It's just a means of identification. So the Lord know who to kill and who to let live, who to punish and who to give peace to. Simple as that. Let's go back to the last 2 million years. And this time we're going to page 216. Last 2 million years, and we're going to page 216 because he said that he was going to cause you to not be able to buy or sell unless you take this mark. Well, that's not nothing new. The Catholic Church has been doing that. Page 216. And when you get there, we're going to read just what we got highlighted right there. Read the top of the title as well. When you get there, go ahead.
Pagan rites absorbed.
Pagan rites absorbed. Go ahead.
By a stroke of tactical genius, the church, while intolerant of pagan beliefs, was able to harness the powerful emotions generated by pagan worship. Often, churches were sited where temples had stood before, and many heathen festivals were added to the Christian calendar.
Many heathen festivals. So he's letting you know that the church is not giving you what thus said the Lord. They mix and mingled all the foolishness that from the Greeks, from the Babylonians, from the Medes and the Persians. They took all that stuff and bundled it up into one and created their own form of religion. They created their own form of religion. And they pretty much made it a law that you had to obey it. The changing from the Sabbath day from Saturday to Sunday by Roman Emperor Constantine was a decreed law. And you had to do it. Keep going.
Easter, for instance, a time of sacrifice and rebirth in the Christian year, takes its name from the Norse goddess Eostre, in whose honor rites were held every spring.
You see that? So even Easter, they just threw you one. Even the practice that we all practice Easter that you know comes from goddess Esther. It's not from God. Passover. God gave you unleavened bread, which came directly after the Passover. What did Rome do? What did the Roman Catholic Church give you? Nah, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to give you Easter. Because they was mixing all the other foolish religions together and just throwing Christ's name on top of it. That's what's going to cause you to be bought by you following that tradition and keeping that tradition and doing things the way they tell you to do, which is ultimately against what the Lord told you to do. The Lord told you to keep Passover and unleavened bread. They told you to keep Easter. So what you think, when it comes time for you to get the mark, and the Lord is going to identify you by the things you've been doing, people. Not necessarily by something physically on you. The Lord don't need nothing physically on you to know what you are and who you are. He identifies you by your actions and your thoughts. And he got these angels out here keeping a record and letting him know, just like the angel with the inkhorn, letting them know who is who. And they putting spiritual marks on you, like a spiritual mark was put on Cain, just like a spiritual mark was put on the children of Israel for obedience. For obedience, they got that spiritual mark. Let's go back to Revelation. Let's go to Revelation, the 6th chapter. Revelation, the 6th chapter. We almost done. Revelation, the 6th chapter. Revelation 6. Revelation, the 6th chapter. And when you get there, I want you to start reading at verse 9. Revelation, the 6th chapter and verse 9. And let's just pay attention to what they're going to be doing at the last days. Revelation 6 and verse 9. When you get there, go ahead.
And when he had opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held.
For the word of God and the testimony which they held. So for people not or refusing to go with the status quo during this time of the mark of the beast, people are going to be getting killed for keeping the testimony of God. Go ahead.
And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?
Mm-hmm.
And white robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled.
Mm-hmm. That's what's going to happen to them. That's what's going to happen when you decide that you're not going to follow the customs and the practices given to you by this beast and this false prophet. They are going to be killing you for not following the practices or not, it's like they used to say back in the day, agreeing with what they telling you to do. See, doing what we doing right now, and that's just simply telling you the truth and exposing certain lies and things that they have given you, that's not going to be allowable soon. That's not going to be allowable. But going along with it is going to cause your ultimate ruin. Let's go back to the Romans. The last 2 million years. This time we're going to page 290 because they ain't just start doing this. They ain't just start doing this. They didn't start doing this at all. They've been trying to force you to go along with their foolishness. Last 2 million years, page 290 if I'm correct, and read what we got highlighted right here, started right there. This last 2 million years again, this is page 290. When you get there, go ahead.
Control of religious ideas.
Control of religious ideas. It's talking about Rome, people. The Roman Catholic Church, this last ruling empire that Christ is going to come in the time of, that's still here to this day. Because they're still ruling. Go ahead.
For centuries, the Christian church was as much concerned to preserve orthodoxy within its own ranks as to convert heathens to the faith.
Mm-hmm.
With its triumphant emergence as the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, the Catholic Church in Rome claimed to be the sole guardian of Christian truth. Christ has
They claim to be the sole guardian of Christian truth. So whatever they say goes pretty much. The Bible was outlawed during these times. They didn't want you to read the Bible. They said, take our word for it. This title right here means replacement of Christ. Don't worry about what he told you to do. I'm the replacement. You do what I tell you to do. That's what they've been doing. Go ahead.
Christ has said to St. Peter, Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And the popes were regarded as the direct successors of Peter. Dogma Dogma developed through the ages as the result of debate within the church on such matters as the nature of God and Christ.
So it was debate about that. Go ahead.
Any new ideas which seem to contradict established teaching in those matters were denounced as dangerous heresy.
You see that? Anything that was contradicting to what the Pope was telling you was pretty much deemed heresy. That means false religion. That was a problem in their eyes. Go ahead.
And punished with varying degrees of severity.
And they punished you because of it. Go ahead.
Excommunication.
Cutting
a man off from the church and so from the mercy of Christ. Torturing and sometimes burning at the stake were methods used to root out heresy.
Torture and burning at the stake. So they've been doing this. They've been torturing people and making people recant on their previous statements, as they like to say. They've been doing this. Did you finish that?
Yes.
Okay. Turn over to page 297. And we're going to get a quick example of it. Because they try to control everything. Page 297 and start reading right there. But just pay attention. This is just the simplest matters of things, how they want to control your thought process about everything. This was a simple matter. And just pay attention to what they said right here. Page 297. Read the title there.
Discovery by telescope.
Go ahead.
The influence which the church still exerted over the study of the workings of the universe was soon to be demonstrated in the case of Galileo Galilei, 1564 through 1642. A professor of mathematics at Pisa in Italy, after hearing of the invention of the telescope by a Dutch optician called Hans Lippershey in 1608, Galileo built himself several of the first of the instruments.
Okay, so pretty much, I know it's hard to understand, but pretty much Galileo, he made some telescopes. Go ahead.
And he was the first man to use them in astronomy. By observation, he found that the moon did not shine by its own light, as Aristotle had believed, but by reflected light from the sun. Okay, so by looking at the moon, he realized that the moon was simply a reflector. Go ahead. He discovered that the Milky Way was composed of distant stars, that Jupiter had satellites, and that the sun had spots. And these sunspots convinced him that Copernicus was right. Their apparent movement across the face of the sun confirmed that the earth was really moving around the sun. Okay, so he pretty much, from his observation through his telescope, he figured out that the moon was a reflector of the sun, and the earth was revolving around the sun. These things they say is true even to this day. It don't mean much to me, but these things that they say is true even to this day. But it wasn't being taught that way by the church at this time. Go ahead. This was no longer a matter which the church was prepared to tolerate as a mental exercise. You see that? The church was not prepared to tolerate that because they were saying otherwise. Go ahead. In the 1630s, the Catholic Church was fighting for survival against the forces of the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation. Go ahead. And Catholics and Protestants were destroying Central Europe in the 30 Years' War. Mm-hmm. The Copernican theory that the earth moved around the sun was heresy, for it denied what the church officially taught. Galileo was denounced to the Inquisition, imprisoned, and forced to recant. What was he done again? Galileo was what? Galileo was denounced to the Inquisition. He was denounced to the Inquisition. Go ahead. Imprisoned and forced to recant. Imprisoned and forced to recant. See, that's what they're going to do to us in the last days. You out here, you think you preaching the gospel, you telling the truth. You're going to find yourself investigated. That's what the Inquisition was. You're going to find yourself on trial. You're going to find yourself in prison. And you're going to be publicly told to say that you didn't mean what you said and that you was wrong. And if you don't do it, what they say was going to do, they torture you. They kill you. They excommunicate you. So when they start doing it anew later on down the road, we shouldn't be surprised because they've been doing it. Read that again about Galileo. Galileo was denounced to the Inquisition, imprisoned, and forced to recant. But legend has it that even as he publicly denied that the earth moved, He muttered to himself, and yet it moves.
But he publicly denied that the earth moved. You know why he did that? Because they was going to kill him. They was going to torture him for saying anything against their teachings. And that's what they're going to be doing in the last days. That's why the saints are going to be wore out by this beast and this false prophet in the last days. And by recanting what you're saying, you are going along with the status quo. Guess what that is going to do? Ultimately, cause you to receive a spiritual mark for the Lord to identify you by. See, when it comes time for you to go buy and sell and shop, you're going to have to probably physically or verbally say that you're with it. You're going to have to pledge your allegiance. You're going to have to pledge your pretty much, not just allegiance, but pretty much say that you believe this to be, you believe what they're telling you to do is true. You're going to have to openly practice their customs and their religious practices. You're going to have to do all these things to be accepted for the most part. And without acceptance, you are going to be shunned and you're not going to be able to do anything. That's pretty much what is going to be going on at the time. And that going along with it, the Lord is going to use that as a way of identifying you. Because these angels out here looking, people. They out here looking. Let's go back to Daniel, the 7th chapter. They out here marking you spiritually. Keeping up with who did what and who said who. These angels are out here working. Just like they was working in the days of Ezekiel. Isaiah, the 7th chapter. And we got one more after this, and that's it. Isaiah, the 7th chapter. And when you get there, we're going to start reading at verse 19. Isaiah 7 and verse 19. When you get there, go ahead.
And they shall come and shall rest all of them in the desolate valleys.
That's not what I said. Isaiah the 7th, I'm sorry, Daniel the 7th chapter. I messed up. Daniel the 7th chapter. Apologies. Daniel the 7th chapter and verse 19. When you get there, go ahead.
Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet.
Mm-hmm.
And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows.
That one horn is in representation of the Pope and the office he represents. He's the one that knocked off 3 kings. We got a lesson to show you that. But that's what that's talking about. Go ahead.
I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints.
He made war with the saints. He's going to have a problem with you saying that he's lying. He's going to have a problem with you telling the world that Christmas is wrong. And that Halloween is pagan. And Easter is really practiced to a goddess, Estra, the fertility god, and things of those natures. He's going to have a problem with you saying that. And he's going to have you put on trial, investigated, and forced to recant. And if you're not willing to do that, you are going to suffer the ultimate price, which is ultimately going to be death. The Bible lets us know that. Read verse 21 again.
I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and the judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom.
Because the Lord is going to come during the time of this 4th kingdom, the time of Rome. Go ahead.
Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces.
And it has devoured the entire earth through this false religion. This Catholic religion that all these other religions derive from. This Catholicism that has infected the entire planet with true abominable practices. Go ahead.
And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings.
Mm-hmm.
And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time, and times in the dividing of time.
And that's the 3.5 years when the Pope is going to be ruling out of Jerusalem and causing havoc and making craft prosper in his hand. And this is the time that you're really going to have to put up or shut up. Or you're going to suffer the consequence. One more place, Revelation 20. Revelation, the 20th chapter. So as we see, this mark doesn't necessarily have to be physical, people. The Lord has means of identifying his servants and the servants of Satan easily. And it was always representation in your head or your forehead or in your hand, even going way back to the days of Moses. Revelation 20, and when you get there, start reading at verse 4. Revelation 20 and verse 4, when you get there, go ahead.
And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands.
You see that? Neither received his mark on their foreheads, on their hands. How do you receive that mark? By following his customs, following his traditions, following his laws and things he wants you to do. That's how you receive that mark, just like you receive the Lord's mark by doing what he tells you to do in the same spot. Read that verse again, I'm sorry.
And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years.
So when it's all said and done, people, you're gonna have to choose your actions very wisely, and your action is gonna be what God uses to identify you as either his or Satan's, and that's ultimately what's gonna be the mark. You decide to follow the practice of this Roman Catholic Church, this blasphemy, this wine that they got the whole world drunk with. If you go along with that, then you trust and believe you are marked as a sinner and as one of theirs. And I hope you got some understanding in the name of Jesus. Till next time, peace.